Ohio State's loss proves once again what we've been saying since late last season. The old-time analysts on ESPN need to move on from the old-fashioned teams and start opening their eyes to the new world of college football, where anything can happen, and usually does. We'll update the latest poll and more in college football, and also go over the top stories from Week 9 of the NFL, as the OFN on PSN starts now. All right, it's Monday, the 5th of November, 2017. I'm your host, Greg DePalma. Is it the 5th or the 6th? I think it's the 6th, right? It is the 6th. Why did I say the 5th? I think I said the 5th on a Jet show before. I should know. Because I know what the 7th means. That's an inside kind of thing. It's just for me. Anyway. All right, so we have a lot to go over here in a short period of time. Let's get started with college football. As I mentioned, it is. I tell you what. There's nothing that I like more than to come on these shows after a weekend of watching college football and say I told you so. Because not you, but those analysts. The ones that just want to Ohio State this, Ohio State that, JT Barrett this, JT Barrett that. We told you last week not to get overexcited about Ohio State, didn't we? We told you that there was a chance that they could lose twice. Now, Penn State's not the team to take advantage of it, but we'll get to them in a little bit. But the fact is, it's really Ohio State. It's that if you watch the Ohio State-Penn State game, you knew watching the game it wasn't a great game. It reminds me of last year's Ohio State-Michigan game that we told you. We told you after the Ohio State a matter of fact, it was the same ESPN people that said, "Oh, that was such a great game, the Ohio State-Michigan game. Oh, of course Ohio State's going to go to the playoffs. Oh, there's no way you can take Penn State. Of course Ohio State, even though Penn State beat Ohio State, even though Penn State won the Big Ten, you have to take Ohio State. Did you see that Ohio State-Michigan game? Oh, you got to take Ohio State." We told you left and right and sideways that was a bad game. That the only reason that they even beat Michigan in that game was because Michigan had no quarterback. That Michigan should have won that game. It was an ugly win. And sure enough, what happens? And of course, it was a whole lot more than just that game was the reason why we thought Penn State should have been in the playoffs, not Ohio State. But the point we were making was Ohio State was not as good as they were letting you to believe they were. And what happened? Clemson beat the crap out of them. And nothing changed. Nothing changed. Same thing. Ohio State has done nothing all year. Nothing. They lose. They play one good team. They lose to them at home. They go and they beat up a bunch of cupcakes. And then they beat a Penn State team that, as we saw last week, McSorley at a second straight week did not play well. And their offensive coordinator needs psychology, needs to talk. Somebody needs to sit down and have a talk with him. Okay? Because how on earth do you let McSorley pass the ball in a close game, nip and tuck? You actually had the lead in the fourth quarter. How do you allow McSorley to pass the ball 47 times when you've got the best player in college football in the backfield in Saquon Barkley, and you hand off the ball to him 14 times? I mean, it's not Baker Mayfield. McSorley is a nice college quarterback. That's all he is. He's never going to be a pro. He's just a nice college quarterback. But he becomes a below nice quarterback when you ask to put all the burden on winning a game. That's not what he's there for. McSorley is not an upper tier quarterback. I just could not believe the play calling in that game. But that was the Michigan State game. So anyway, you got McSorley not playing well. You've got the defense not playing well. I mean, that game against Michigan State was ugly. Both games were ugly. They don't deserve it. So Penn State, good night, goodbye. For Ohio State, same thing. Okay, wow, remember we told you about that game. All the penalties in that game. the turnovers, the fact that Penn State should have put Ohio State away several times and couldn't do it. It wasn't because Ohio State was great. It was because Penn State wasn't good enough to put them away. And what happens? I mean, look, nobody can call that score. I get that against Iowa. But reality set in. They're not that good. Okay? How much more proof do we need when we listen to these guys? That's the thing I try to say all the time. Is listen to the analysts that say these things. The ones that repeatedly say the same stuff and they're constantly wrong about it. So you know not to listen to them ever again. It's ridiculous. And we told you about JT Barrett. We said, okay, we give him credit for one game. He had a good game. He gets credit. But do it again. Show it wasn't just one game. Because if you're gonna do anything special, if you're gonna actually lead this team to a national championship or something like that, then you have to play like this. So go ahead and do it again. You couldn't. First play of the game, pick six. And he was awful the rest of the game. He had 4 interceptions in the game. I mean, that was destruction. And remember, when we went over last week, we went over the fact, watch out in these next 2 weeks, because with the Iowa game, we told you about what they did with Penn State. We told you about what they did with Michigan. And here they are again in the same home dog situation to watch out for, especially coming off the Penn State game. How emotional that is to have a game like that. Everything that you just throw into that game, and then you have to go on the road the very next week and play that team in their stadium where they have come close before and have done it as far as being an upset, as far as being a home dog. I mean, they almost had 2 big home dog wins in 1 year. Now they have 2 out of 3. And Penn State scored their touchdown in the last play of the game, or else they would have had 3 double-digit home dog upset wins over Michigan, Penn State, and Ohio State. So goodbye, Ohio State. Good night. And now we have to hear people talking about, well, maybe this is a bad thing for Wisconsin. Maybe, is it possible Wisconsin can get shut out of the playoffs even if they go undefeated because Ohio State's lost twice? So now all of a sudden, if Ohio State can't go to the playoffs, then nobody in the Big Ten can. Yeah, that's can't do that. I mean, anybody, look, I don't care what the polls say right now. I don't. I couldn't care less. If Wisconsin, by the way, they're 6th. If Wisconsin wins the Big Ten and doesn't lose a game the rest of the year, I guarantee you 100%, not 99, not 99.9, 100% Wisconsin will go to the playoffs. Okay? That you can bet your mortgage on. There is no way they will be held out of the playoffs if they win the Big Ten and go undefeated. I don't care what the polls say right now. All right? So that's just a fact. And by the way, keep this in mind too. Don't worry about the polls we're talking about today anyway. Remember last week's stupid polls? Remember we were on the show last week complaining about how dumb the polls were by Ohio State being ahead of Oklahoma? And then we gave credit to the playoff committee because they had Oklahoma ahead of Ohio State. So we gave them credit for that. So don't worry about the polls. It's the playoff rankings that matter the most. And I don't even care what the playoff rankings say either. It's still Wisconsin in the playoffs undefeated. All right? So just forget it. Let's not even go there. All right. So anyway, with Ohio State now out of the picture, you look at the way the polls are right now, and the only reason I'm going to reference them right now is just to show you that the teams that are right now in the top 10 are all the teams that are the last teams that have a chance to get to the playoffs. I mean, a lot of crazy stuff would have to happen for any team outside the top 10, the way the polls are right now, to make the playoffs. I'm talking about a lot of losing, where you get a bunch of teams losing twice, and that's not going to happen. We haven't seen that yet. So right now, that means that you've got even, of course, Auburn, which we've talked about for a month now. That Auburn, and people are starting to finally pick up on this. That because we told you right after Auburn's loss, actually, it was what, 2-3 weeks? We told you right after they lost to LSU that don't count them out, that they could still get to the playoffs. Now, I didn't say they were going to get to the playoffs. I just said that keep in mind that if Auburn wins out and they don't lose another game, that means they're going to win the SEC championship, and that means that to hold an SEC team out of the playoffs is going to be hard. So don't count them out. Now, I also prefaced it by saying don't worry about that anyway, because there's no way Jarrett Stidham is going to beat both Georgia and and Alabama, and then beat Georgia again. Okay? It's not happening. So do not put any money on Auburn. Okay? Hold on to your money. Do not waste it. We do believe, though, that Georgia and Auburn, that's the game this week. That's a huge game, of course. You take a look at the games this week, some more good games. The big game is Georgia Auburn, and the other big game is Notre Dame Miami. Now we told you last week when we had a very special guest on the show. Actually, we were interviewing him on the meeting room. That's our interview show. And we had Mike Frank on from Irish Sports Daily, and we were going over, we're looking ahead at the possibility of a big game between Notre Dame and Miami, and that's what we got. So we have Notre Dame Miami, big game number 1, and Georgia Auburn, big game number 2. Then you got some other good games. You got Alabama, Mississippi State, Michigan State, Ohio State, Iowa, Wisconsin, TCU, Oklahoma is also very, very important. Matter of fact, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and put TCU, Oklahoma. Let's see. I don't know why I did that. I'm going to put that as 3 big games. Okay, so we got Georgia, Auburn, TCU, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Miami. Those are 3 really big games coming up this week. The other good games include Oklahoma State, Iowa State, Washington, Stanford, and Washington State, Utah. But and by the way, Boise State's an important game at Colorado State for the Mountain West, and Toledo is playing Ohio during the week. That's coming up, I think, in a couple of days. And that game is also a very big game in the MAC. So, but some really good games coming up. And if you take a look at the way the rankings are right now and related to these games, so Georgia, number 2, and Auburn, number 10. But I think Georgia's only a 2.5-point favorite in that game. So I'm all over Georgia. I love that game. Right now, I think Georgia's the best team in college football. Sure, I think you have to prove it in another situation. They've already beaten a good team in Notre Dame. I mean, Notre Dame's the 3rd-ranked team in college football, and they won at Notre Dame. So it's not like they have to prove it 5 times. But it is time for them to prove it again, no question. So it's good timing. Get this game, prove it, go to the SEC championship game, play Alabama, and then prove it again, which I think they will. I think this is the best team in college football. Now, keep in mind, Georgia does not have to win the game this week to win the national championship. With the fact that right now at Alabama, Georgia, Wisconsin, Miami as the only top teams undefeated, you're going to have a situation where you are going to have 1-loss teams that are going to be in the playoffs like you always have. So if Georgia loses to Auburn this week, they win out, they beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, Georgia will be in the playoffs. So you don't have to worry about that if you're a Georgia fan. So this is not a must-win. Matter of fact, if you're a Georgia fan and you know you're going to have a loss, you want to lose this week and beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. But I think they're going to win both of those games. I think it is going to be kind of tough. I'm not going to rule it out that whoever loses the SEC championship game is not going to make the playoffs. I'm not going to say I'm going to rule it in or out. It all depends what these other teams do. I think if Notre Dame wins out, that's trouble for the SEC championship loser. If Clemson wins out, trouble for the SEC championship loser. And if Oklahoma wins out or Wisconsin wins out. So really, if what do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4 of those teams. So if 3 out of those 4 teams win out, okay, between Notre Dame, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin, if three, two, yeah, three. If three of them win out, then you're done. That's just the way it is, because well, I wouldn't say you're done, but I think it's going to be really hard under the situation we're in to put two SEC teams in if you have major conference teams either undefeated or with one loss, like Wisconsin, Oklahoma. Oklahoma is now, because of Oklahoma, because keep in mind, Oklahoma has already beaten now Oklahoma State and Ohio State. And it doesn't matter where they're ranked now, where they were ranked at the time. It's important too, especially since they were both on the road. So if Oklahoma wins out, plus beating TCU this week, that's enough. Those are enough wins compared to Oklahoma. Excuse me, compared to, say, Alabama. I'm just going to use Alabama since I think Georgia's going to win. That would be enough. Okay, so there's no way you can push Oklahoma out with one loss, with Alabama with one loss, when you compare the schedules. I mean, you can. That's the playoff committee. But again, because the reason why you can't do it is because you can't just push in a second team from a conference. See, if Georgia and Alabama were separate conferences, it's different. But since they're not in the same conference, you just can't do that. You can't have two conference teams. Look what happened with Penn State and Ohio State. One team got in. They could have put Penn State in. Actually, what they should have done was put Penn State in and decided between Ohio State and Washington, which they didn't. But that's why I can't see that happening. Same thing with Clemson, especially since they won the national championship last year. If Clemson wins out, I'm sorry, but I just don't. I don't see them going, okay, we're just going to knock them out. Now, I would say keep an eye on it. We'll see how Alabama plays the rest of the year. We'll see how Georgia plays the rest of the year. I'm not ruling it out. Plus, I don't think it's so easy for those teams to win. I mean, with so many possible upsets on any given week, it's very realistic to think that two of those teams will lose again between Notre Dame, Clemson, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin, and that's all it'll take. If two out of those four teams lose again, then you could very well have undefeated Alabama or Georgia, one loss Alabama or Georgia in the Final Four. Let's say one of those teams between Wisconsin, let's say Notre Dame beats Miami. So let's just say that. So because we're going to try to get one of these teams out. So let's say Miami's out, because the loser of that game is out. Okay, because even though Miami will only have one loss, there's no way Miami is going to wind up in the playoffs with one loss. It's not going to happen. I mean, they're going to need a lot to happen. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but forget it. There's just no way that Miami's getting into the playoffs with one loss. So to make it easy, let's just say Miami loses this week, which I kind of think they're going to. I like Notre Dame. I think they're better than Miami, but we'll see. I mean, I like the fact that Miami's winning all these close games. I liked them last week against Virginia Tech, as you know. So I've liked Miami a lot this year. I mean, I liked them against Florida State. They came through for me there at the end. They just keep finding ways to win. I've told you all season. I told you last year how much I love Mark Richt. I love that move by Miami to get Richt. I've said it all year that give them a year or two and they're going to be back to. This is going to be natural for them. This what you're seeing with Miami is the beginning. I mean, the fact that he hasn't even had time. He hasn't even had a few years to recruit. And look what's happening right now. I mean, he's doing an incredible job. So once he's able to recruit and get his guys in there, then Miami is going to be they're going to be one of these other, just like the old Miami. You'll see. So, but Oklahoma's got to play TCU. Then Oklahoma's also got to play in the Big 12 championship game, and they may have to play Oklahoma State again. Now, I think that if Oklahoma is going to lose again, though, it's going to be this week. I think it's going to be against TCU. Or I should say, if Oklahoma is going to lose again, it'll be TCU. Maybe TCU they play in the championship game. I think TCU is the only team that can beat them. Oklahoma State cannot beat Oklahoma. Oklahoma is just a better version of Oklahoma State. It's the reason why we liked them last week. They just have a better quarterback. Baker Mayfield is a better quarterback than Mason Rudolph. He just is. Okay? He'll be drafted ahead of Rudolph, even though they're not. See, the reason why I think Mayfield is going to be, and again, a lot of it depends on if these other guys are coming out. But I'm just thinking about, let's just say it's, even if it's just Allen and Rosen, I wouldn't be surprised if both Allen and Rosen get drafted ahead of Mayfield. Both, and that's because once they get these kids into the workouts, and I think there are going to be certain things between the fact that Mayfield may not have a laser arm, Allen has a better arm, Mayfield a smaller guy. I'm sorry, I just think no matter what I say about him, because hey, nobody seemed to listen to me about Deshaun Watson. So no matter what I say about Baker Mayfield, it ain't going to matter, and I don't think it will matter. I think the scouts are going to look at specific things about Mayfield. We talked about it with Dan Shanka last week, that he is not going to be the top quarterback. He's not even going to be the second quarterback, more than likely. He could be, but it all depends, and chances are he won't be. And then a lot of it also depends, does Sam Darnold come out or not? Because if Sam Darnold comes out, Darnold will be drafted ahead of Mayfield too. But Mayfield is better than Rudolph. And Mayfield will be drafted ahead of Rudolph. And I think we saw that again. I mean, just take a look at the stats in that game. Let's see. You had Mayfield 598 yards, Rudolph 448 yards. They both threw for 5 touchdowns. They both threw 2 interceptions. The stats were pretty similar. Mayfield had 150 more. But you could just tell when, especially at the end of the game, Rudolph just did not make the big throws when he needed to. Mayfield did. That's the difference between the two quarterbacks. Mayfield has it. Rudolph doesn't. Doesn't mean that Rudolph's not going to be a fine quarterback at the next level. Just means Mayfield, I think, is better. So, but TCU does have a defense. They have proven this year. Patterson has been able to get this team to play defense again. We asked for that last year. That if TCU is going to get back to being a top team in that conference, they couldn't try to outscore everybody. They had to try to go back to doing what they did best under Gary Patterson, even before they got to the Big 12, and that's play great defense. So now they don't have a great defense, but they have a good defense. And that defense could be good enough to beat Oklahoma. Now, I don't necessarily, and I know Oklahoma doesn't have a great defense. They don't have anything close to a great defense. But I still think Oklahoma is a better team than TCU. Plus, they're at home, so I still think they will beat TCU. But you would be potentially asking Oklahoma to beat them twice. It's not going to be easy for them to do that. So keep that in mind. And then Clemson, I mean, the schedule for Clemson says that they should be able to run the table. So that's probably going to happen until they get to the ACC championship game, where they will more than likely play Miami. And I am not going to give them that game. As much as I like Clemson, Bryant's not Deshaun Watson. He's not anything close to Deshaun Watson. That worries me. I think they were very fortunate to escape North Carolina State. North Carolina State played a great game against them. I mean, that game was even. That was an even game. So Clemson's defense did not play as good as I thought they were going to play, and have to play most of the season. So I think that's worrisome. So I think Clemson is vulnerable because, in the past you could always say, well, but there's Deshaun Watson to get them out of it. You can't say that with Bryant, especially when the competition gets a little bit raised and you also have to play in bigger, tenseful, more stressful games. So I can see Clemson losing again. All right. And if they lose again, they're out. Again, Wisconsin, all they got to do is lose once, they're out. Miami loses once, they're out. So 2 SEC teams in the playoffs, yes, I can definitely see that. Matter of fact, I'll tell you right now, if I had to predict it, I would. If I had to predict it, I would say that both Alabama and Georgia will end up in the playoffs. I'm thinking Notre Dame might get there. I really am. It all depends. I mean, obviously, what happens this week against Miami. This is the big one. Now, they do have to play Stanford, too. Now, they don't have to worry about no championship game. But Notre Dame is also going to have to play at Stanford. But Notre Dame, the way they're playing, I think they're better than Stanford, even though it's at Stanford. So this is it. This is the game that, for all intents and purposes, is going to decide whether Notre Dame goes to the playoffs. And I don't know. I'm leaning towards Notre Dame. I really am. I'm leaning. And if they do beat Miami this week, then Notre Dame is going to wind up Oh, by the way, speaking of Miami, Gary Furman is going to be on the program, actually on our meeting room show on Wednesday. So Gary Furman, I've known Gary for a long time. Used to work with him back in Fort Lauderdale on a radio station, a Fox station down there. Gary is he runs Cane Sport, and that is a big time Miami Hurricane website at Rivals website. So we'll be talking to Gary about the Canes and Notre Dame on Wednesday. So maybe he could talk me into going with Miami. But that should be a great game. Looking forward to it. But so let's say Notre Dame does beat Miami, though. See, Wisconsin, the next 2 weeks are not going to be easy for Wisconsin. Now, to expect Iowa after beating Ohio State to go on the road this week and then beat Wisconsin is asking for a lot. Uh, but Wisconsin does need to step up their game. They have not played anybody this year. And when you step up and all of a sudden, I mean, seriously, anybody. I mean, the best team Wisconsin has played this year was Northwestern. That's the best team they played all year. And they played them at home. So this is not going to be easy for Wisconsin by any stretch, especially because they're a banged up team. I mean, now Taylor did have a good game, but he wasn't 100% going into the game. But that was good to see him for Wisconsin fans play. But their receiving situations, they're a banged up receiving core. Now they do have Fumagalli, the tight end, is healthy, and that's good for them. But they don't have any receivers right now that are healthy, any of their top receivers. That makes them a pretty easy to defend team. They want to run, and they're not going to stretch you in the passing game. They want to go to the tight end, they have the short passing game, and they want to run the ball. That's it. So and Iowa's got a pretty decent defense. So it will be a tricky game for Wisconsin. Then next week after that, they get a better Michigan team because Michigan now is learning how to run the football again. Michigan is running the football better than they have in a long time. They now have a quarterback that is gaining experience every week, that knows how to throw the football, unlike O'Korn and Spate. So now he just has to get comfortable doing it. It's not easy, though, because he's got a lot of young kids around him as well. And I'm talking about Brandon Peters. But now this Michigan team is playing better and looking better than they have all season. And so that's not going to be easy for Wisconsin to win those next 2 games at home, especially if they continue to have issues at wide receiver. So I think they might lose. I really do. If I had to predict it, I would say that Wisconsin will lose once in the next 2 weeks. You just have to figure out who they lose to. So I think Wisconsin's going to lose. Right now I'm leaning towards Miami losing. I'm going to say Oklahoma's going to win out. I will say they'll win out. I'm not going to say it's easy, but I'll say they'll win out. And Notre Dame will win out. So I'm leaning towards Notre Dame. So if I had to go with it today, I would go Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, Oklahoma. And since one of the 2 SEC teams will lose, one of those 2 teams will probably be 4th, I would think. And I think you'll probably the winner of the SEC would be number 1. So I think Georgia's going to be 1. All right. And then there's no way you can pit those two. See, here's the thing, which should be interesting. What they're going to have to do is they can't just blindly say, all right, who's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we'll just, hey, whoever's 1, 2, 3, 4. What they really have to do is go. We can't if we're kind of we think. Let's say Alabama loses. We think Alabama's 4. That's where we're going to put them. But they could be 3. Well, you put them 3 because nobody wants to see Georgia Alabama play. And let's say Georgia beats them. Nobody wants to see Georgia have to beat Alabama a second consecutive game. That's not fair. And nobody wants to see that anyway. If they're going to play each other again, they play for the national championship. And then prove to everybody that you're the 2 best teams because you have beaten 2 other teams in a playoff situation, or at least one other game. So that's what I think would happen. So I would say Georgia 1, Alabama 3, and then Notre Dame 2, and Oklahoma 4. So that means I'll have Georgia, Oklahoma, and Notre Dame, Alabama. That's the way I would have it for the playoffs right now. And it's way too early for me to tell you how I would go, where I would go from there. A lot's going to depend on Alabama staying healthy, because Alabama is, I think Alabama is more banged up in the past couple of weeks than they've been banged up in years. And not that they have like a mash unit. Everybody wants to make it seem like, oh, Alabama is dealing with all these injuries. You want to go deal with a lot of injuries? Take a look at North Carolina. Teams like that. That's a lot of injuries. Alabama's got like 7 or 8 injuries in the entire team. They just happen to have 3 that are from, very key guys. So, but besides Sean Dion Hamilton, which is a big injury, I mean, that's Dan Shanka's top senior rated inside linebacker coming out for the 2018 draft. So, right now he's out. But you also have Deshaun Hand and Minka Fitzpatrick dealing with injuries. But right now, Alabama, can they beat Mississippi State without those guys? Yeah, probably. But we'll see. I mean, I said it last week that this Mississippi State game could be maybe even tougher for Alabama to beat than Auburn. And it could be. And the reason is because, again, I just don't trust Jarrett Stidham against Alabama's defense. I'm sorry. Now, I trust Auburn's defense to stop Alabama's. But just like we saw with the LSU game, see, if you have a one-dimensional team, you're in big trouble against Alabama's defense. Alabama's defense over the years, since Saban's been there, has always beaten teams that are one-dimensional. They do not lose to one-dimensional teams. Okay, they lose to Chad Kelly in Mississippi because they can throw the ball. They lose to Deshaun Watson because he throws the ball, but they do not lose to one-dimensional running teams. And that's exactly what LSU is, and that's why they've beaten up on LSU over the years, and that's exactly what Auburn is. And that's why they are not going to – I don't think that they'll lose to Auburn. So unless Jarrett Stidham – see, even if Auburn loses to Georgia this week, if Stidham plays well, which I doubt, because I think if he plays well, they could beat Georgia. So I don't expect them to play well. But if he were to play well and surprise me and they win, okay, then we'll talk about that next week. And we got a whole new interesting twist with Auburn and Alabama in a few weeks after that. But as long as he plays well enough and doesn't look like he did against Clemson or LSU, the two best defenses he's played so far. Now he's got to go up against Georgia and Alabama's defense. So if he plays reasonably well and doesn't lose the game, then yeah, I could see Auburn beating Alabama. I mean, but when I say play well, I don't mean throws for 70% and he has 1 touchdown and no picks. I'm talking like he makes plays. He actually does something where he beats you several times in the passing game in key spots. All right, something he just does not do. So that's why but that's something that we'll find out first of all this week against Georgia before we even get to Auburn and Alabama. But Alabama, Mississippi State, as we said last week, the reason why we thought that this could be even a tougher game is because of the fact that, see, I actually would rather go with Fitzgerald than Stidham. See, at least Fitzgerald, he can throw the ball a little bit, and he's also a dynamic, playmaker. So I think he's a better quarterback, college quarterback, definitely, than Stidham. I'd much rather have Fitzgerald. So that's so I can see that being. I'm not saying right now Mississippi State is going to beat him, but that's especially with Alabama being banged up. I mean, they did not play a good game against LSU. I mean, that was an ugly win. I mean, they did nothing. I mean, Jalen Hurts was 11 of 24, and he didn't play well. So now LSU's defense is better than Mississippi State's, but Dan Mullen is also a better coach than Ed Orgeron. So that's going to be a tricky situation because all bets are off the table if Mississippi State and Auburn win this week. What I mean by that is now all of a sudden, if one of those teams pulls off the upset this week, then there is a chance. Well, the chance of having 2 teams in the playoffs in the SEC is over. All right, this is not going to happen. Both teams, the only way you have 2 teams in the SEC playing in the playoffs is they're going to have to play each other in that championship game undefeated. Or the team that wins the game has to be the team with 1 loss, beating the team that's undefeated. So if both teams were to lose this week, Georgia and Alabama, that's it. It's over. No way does two SEC teams get to the playoffs. Doesn't have a chance. So that makes things interesting in that respect. But again, that's still not something that I'm looking at. Still think Georgia will be too much for Auburn, but we'll see. All right. So anyway, that's the way I see it as far as the playoffs are concerned. And we'll talk more about this later in the week, including, of course, the fact that we've got our interviews that we have already set up, by the way. We're going to be interviewing, as far as the TCU game, we're going to be interviewing Jeremy Clark this week from HornFrogBlitz.com. So we'll talk about TCU. We'll talk about the TCU-Oklahoma game. We're going to interview from Michigan State, Hondo Carpenter. He's from Scout.com, covering Michigan State football. So we'll talk to him about a crazy, miraculous season that Michigan State's having right now. We'll see if that can continue against Ohio State this week. So we'll talk to Hondo. We'll also talk to Gary Furman from Cane Sport, as I mentioned. BJ Rains from Idaho Press Tribune. We'll talk about Boise State football. Right now, they've got the edge, looking like they might be the team to get back and win the Mountain West Championship for the first time in years. So, but there's still a lot of football to be played there. And also, we might have this week or next week, Jerry Ratcliffe from the Daily Progress. He covers Virginia football to talk about what's going on with the Cavs as they get bowl eligible for the first time in years under Bronco Mendenhall. So that's what's coming up later in the week when we talk college football. Of course, we'll have our college football preview show on Friday, starting at 2 o'clock, by the way. And that's the show that we're going to have both our Michigan State and TCU guests on. All right. Gary Furman, by the way, will be on Wednesday. And we have not yet solidified the day or time yet for interviews with Boise State and Virginia. Let's now talk with what we have time left now on what's going on in the NFL. And Ben McAdoo is going to be gone. Dirk Cutter should be gone. We've said that for a couple of years. We've said this for a couple of years. Marvin Lewis should be gone. Steve Sarkisian should be gone. Vance Joseph has proven that he's a bust. No way is Denver. I don't care what you say. The only reason Denver's playing this bad is because of Vance Joseph. That's it. It's the only reason. The coaching. There's no big difference. They're not getting anything out of the quarterback position. They didn't get anything out of the quarterback position 2 years ago when they won the Super Bowl. All right, they got a lot of the same. There's nothing on that defense, personnel-wise, that says that defense should be this bad. Now, you do have, besides the coaching. The coaching is it. And it's not just a head coach. They made the coaching changes up and down. That has changed everything for Denver. And hey, that's the way they wanted to go. It's the way John Elway wanted to go. He's done a really good job at this point, but he's failed on this one. You can't win them all, John. So realize the mistake you made and move on, because Vance Joseph and that coaching staff is a major disaster in Denver right now. And as soon as Paxton Lynch is ready to play and healthy, he's going to play the rest of the season. That's it. As far as the Eagles are concerned, we've said this for the last few weeks, and they just keep winning. This is the best team in football right now. That includes the Patriots. Right now, the Eagles are the team to beat, and I don't know what their odds are. The latest odds are, of course, we got them at, 33-1 about a month ago. So we're sitting pretty on those futures. But you know what? Even if they're 4 or 5-1, which they may be, I'd still take that. I really would. Now, you might want to wait for them to lose again, but I wouldn't. You have no idea how things are going to go with Philadelphia the rest of the season. Look at Carolina a couple of years ago. They went 15-1. I've seen a lot of teams go 15-1 that you never would have thought would go 15-1. Some of those teams never even won the Super Bowl. So I would go ahead and take the Eagles now. They're just playing tremendous football, and they are the best team right now. Looking like Eagles, Patriots, Super Bowl. That's the way it's looking right now. Who knows? Maybe we'll get an all Pennsylvania Super Bowl with the Steelers. That would be kind of interesting. But I'm still going Patriots and Eagles at this point in time because Kansas City, done. I will say that the Cowboys, without a doubt, played the best game they played all year. It's not even close. Not even close. Problem is, nobody knows how much longer. See, the longer this goes, that Elliott keeps playing games and postponing the inevitable, if that 6-game suspension comes up, they may get that suspension in there. Who knows? Maybe the last 6 games of the season and he doesn't play. So this is now getting to a point where they're going to have to, they may, if he gets suspended 6 games, they may have to hold on. But what they did a good job of, they played good defense. Scandrick, boy, what an incredible weapon he is in that secondary. I know there was talk about letting him go in the offseason. What a disaster that would have been. And that would have been financial, of course. But that defense, as long as they can they got to keep Sean Lee healthy. I mean, they have to keep him healthy. They have to keep him and Scandrick healthy. But that defense is a good defense. It's not a great defense, but it's a good defense. And that's a good team. All right. And they played their best game of the year. And there's no reason to think that they can't get better now. So that's the first time this season that I've seen the team that I saw last year. But in saying that, that doesn't excuse the Chiefs. All right. This is a problem with Kansas City. If you can shut down their running game and you force Alex Smith to beat you through the air, even though he has proven he can do that at times, but that's what you do on a consistent basis. You keep forcing him to beat you. You're going to wind up in 50-50 situations. Sometimes they'll win, sometimes they'll lose. But that's not, that's not 80% football. If you want to be a great team, that's what you play, 75, 80% football. Not 50-50 football, but that's you got to force Alex Smith to beat you. And I've said this a few weeks ago when they lost that game against Pittsburgh. It was the first loss, and it was the loss when I said that looks to me like the old Andy Reid Chief teams that I've seen over the years. That they get to the postseason, they're playing really good football. You're thinking, look out for the Chiefs, and then they have a bad game like that. And I'm already seeing this play out in my head. That they've already shown us as good as they can play. I think they have peaked. And I'm sorry, I can't see this team winning 2 really big games and maybe even 3 big games in the postseason. Maybe they can, but not as a top favorite type. No. You want to put them in the mix with 5 or 6 other teams, maybe 8 teams. I got no problem with that. But no longer are the Chiefs like a team to beat or anything like that. No, I don't see it. And to tell you the truth, I don't even know what to think about Seattle. 16 penalties. Russell Wilson was terrible. What on earth were they doing at the end? What was he doing at the end of the game when there was what was it? There was like 20 seconds left in the game, right? Something like that, or less than 20. And they get the first down. And why doesn't he spike the ball? There is no reason at all to run a play there. When you're in that situation where he was, you needed 4 downs. I mean, you didn't need 4 downs where they were. You weren't going to get 4 downs anyway. You had to move the ball forward. And at least, especially, because really more than anything, because Walsh wasn't kicking any field goals. You really needed to try to either get a touchdown there or to get as close as possible. So it was a chip shot. So because of that you shouldn't have worried about 4 downs. Just spike the ball. That gives you 2 more downs. You had ample time on the clock because Russell Wilson's going to run around anyway. Russell Wilson is a run-around quarterback, and he ran around more times in that game than I think I've ever seen him run around. So you run around on one play, it's going to cost you like 7-8 seconds. Best thing would have been, look, he ran around in the play that they lost all that time. I'm telling you, that was a boneheaded play. The whole game was terrible. Give credit to the Redskins for winning the game with all the injuries and stuff, and for them for Cousins to lead that touchdown drive at the end. You give them all the credit in the world. But fact is, Seattle just was awful. It was like Seattle looked at the film and went, "Oh, nobody's playing for Washington. Why do we care?" Same thing that I just talked about with Ohio State. And it happens in the NFL too. You have these big games, these emotional games, one week to the next. It's very hard to come back from that. And that's what happened. Seattle had that incredible game that everybody was talking about against Houston. They couldn't come back from it. Psychologically, they just could not. They could not get themselves up for that game. Throw in all the injuries to Washington, throw in the fact that they were at home. They were supposed to roll in that game, and that plays on you psychologically. So, but okay, we can give him the benefit of the doubt. It's one game, and it is Russell Wilson. But I'm sorry. There is no way right now that I could see them beating the Eagles. The Eagles are going to have to really do something bad for me to think that that Seattle can go into Philly and beat them. I just don't see it. Sorry. Eagles are a lot better than Seattle is right now. Matter of fact, I mean, that's the case for any team in the NFC. The only teams in the NFC that I think right now because it would be in Philly, that could give Philly a game and pull off the upset, probably be Dallas. That's it. It's the only team right now that I could see, unless Philly comes back to earth a little bit, and Seattle, because Dwayne Brown's there, and they kind of get the running game going in sync with the passing game, and then they get on a nice roll. That would be it. So I still think there's a shot for Seattle, but and obviously Dallas has to have Elliott. But that's it. Forget Minnesota, unless they get Bradford back and Bradford starts playing like he did in week 1. No Minnesota. They're not going to be able to compete with Philadelphia in Philadelphia. No, it's not going to happen. So, and yes, look, nobody is more excited and happy to see what New Orleans is doing, because that was my other sleeper team in the NFC. Look, I had a couple of sleeper teams in the NFC, Philadelphia and New Orleans, and they're both kicking butt. Now, that hasn't worked out for me in the AFC with Baltimore, but look, they did lose Yonda, and Houston was the other one, and they did lose Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt, so I do have some excuses. But New Orleans doing a great job, and even though that's the case, I forget Carolina. There's no way Carolina is beating Philadelphia. But for New Orleans, as much as I like the Saints, and maybe if the game was in New Orleans, but Drew Brees having to go to Philly to win that game, I need to see more proof. I need to see more of it. Right now, I say no way. But we'll see. Still have a half a season to go for me to see if the Saints can compete with the Eagles. And again, what's going to have to take, though, is either the Eagles are going to have to choke in that spot, or they're going to have to come down to life a little bit. But Dallas is right up there with one of the teams that has a shot to beat the Eagles, and they'll be playing real soon. And also, by the way, that Tennessee-Baltimore game, speaking of Baltimore, Baltimore had 5-6 different ways to win that game. They couldn't do it. The officiating, the spotting on 2 different plays on 4th down is the worst I've seen ever. Seriously. I mean, I've seen bad spots before. I have never seen refs misspot the ball so poorly on 4th down, 4th down measurements twice in the same game before. It was awful. And the first one, they had to go to the replay, and they showed how awful the first spot was, and Baltimore got the first down. But the second one, they did not overturn. And I don't know. I'm not getting an explanation. I don't think John Harbaugh's got any explanation. Because I think what it was because they spotted it where they were. It was one of those things where they must have said that, I think it was Collins who was running the ball, must have, touched the ground. But when they went to replay and you looked at a replay, you saw it and you were like, yeah, I don't think I see him touching the ground. But I think because they couldn't verify it, that they went with the call. But it looked clear to me and everybody. I mean, you're looking at the regular view and you're going, dude, the guy's second effort, he made first down by like a yard. But they had to have thought that his shin touched the ground. Yet I didn't see it on replay. It was one of those things that, didn't see it. So it was terrible. But look, Baltimore didn't deserve to win that game anyway. They even though they outplayed Tennessee, they didn't deserve to win it. They didn't finish the job, and that's part of the problem with Baltimore right now. They just don't have. Everybody wants to give. I mean, what's his name? The former Raven wants to give Ozzie Newsome a break. Every way but sideways. But he wants to rip Harbaugh apart. Yeah, well, Harbaugh's not the one putting the personnel together. All right, Perryman's terrible. He's out there dropping passes left and right. The offensive line has still been pretty much an issue. Yonda leaves, and it's a disaster. I mean, they're okay right now, but the problem is their weaknesses are at guard. But I guess if you're going to have weaknesses, guard is probably a little bit better than tackle. And Flacco is Flacco. I mean, if he doesn't have great protection and a running game, and he doesn't have proper running backs and tight ends to throw to, he's not as effective as he needs to be. But Tennessee got the win. It was a big win for them. And Baltimore is in big trouble right now again. And as I mentioned with Steve Sarkisian, I keep talking about this every week, and this is why I keep talking about it. I said after the Jet win, okay, well, if they can use that as a way to get going and maybe things start to change, okay, we'll see. Nothing happened. Nothing. He's terrible. The offense is terrible. 38 passes. Now, keep in mind, the Atlanta led 10-0 in the game and almost led by more. Matt Ryan threw 38 passes in the game. Freeman and Coleman combined for 16 carries. That is embarrassing. And I don't want to hear some bozo on TV sticking up for Steve Sarkisian because Jones misses can't catch the pass in the end zone. That's not an excuse for 38 passes and 16 rushing attempts. One play. Guy drops one pass, and I'm going to excuse everything that Steve Sarkisian's done all season long. It's a disaster. It's not going to change. Does anybody at all? It's not like they're a mash unit. These are the same guys from last year. That's what we've been saying all year. The only difference is the coordinator. I'm sorry, but it's not going to change. The Falcons are done. They're done. And Carolina's just taking advantage of the fact that they're beating Atlanta and Tampa Bay, two teams that are done the last couple of weeks. That's no big prize. And Jacksonville, congratulations to them. Big win. They disposed of the type of team they're supposed to dispose of. Matter of fact, this was one of those weeks that I like picking games because I like picking the games when I got teams that are sort of like when I picked the Jet Tampa Bay game this week. I'll be easily picking the Jets. I like games where I can pick teams that are psychologically headed in one direction against another team psychologically heading in the other direction. That's what we had with the Eagles in Denver, with the Rams and the Giants. And I'm sorry, even though the Bengals had won 3 out of 4, seriously, have you seen them play? I mean, they barely beat the Colts the week before. I mean, after Pittsburgh's loss, they were done, which means they should have lost to the Colts, and they got lucky. And now we saw what the ramifications of it this week. They're done. And AJ Green's lost his temper because he's done. They're about to implode. So you, as the Jags, you have to win that game. So that was a very nice win. Those are the games you need to win. Same thing with the Saints beating up on Tampa. I love those matchups, and we had a lot of them last week, and I was able to take advantage of all of them. So once we get into that's why in the NFL, things become a little bit easier sometimes to figure out because of that. You have to get those games where you just know that psychologically you have a major edge. And by the way, San Francisco, I understand what you're doing. I completely understand. And there's not a debate here about, okay, should they be doing this or should they not be doing it? But it really is an embarrassment to the league that San Francisco is tanking like this. You can sit there and say, yeah, but they need to have Beathard. They're going to give him some time. But they just proved to you by trading for Garoppolo that all they're doing with Beathard is just, okay, they're giving him some time. That's it. But they have no plans on Beathard being their starting quarterback. If they really cared about this team winning games, sort of like what the Jets are doing with McCown, they really felt like they wanted to win some games. I'm not talking about going 500. I'm talking about just not being embarrassed every week and not do anything because you have a quarterback that's not only a rookie, but a kid who shouldn't even be playing right now in Beathard. He should not be playing. And you just went ahead and got rid of Hoyer. Goodbye. Why do you think they got rid of Hoyer? There's no reason for them not to start Bobby Hoyer for the past month. They before they let Hoyer go, even though they were losing games, they were covering every game. That was the team that kept losing all these close games. Remember they had that run of like 5 games where they lost by a combined 15 points or something? Soon as Hoyer got benched and they went to Beathard, now they get killed every week. I mean, that's tanking. That is tanking. And it's an embarrassment. Sorry, it is a major embarrassment to the league what's going on right now with San Francisco. And I don't want to hear anything about Garoppolo needs like 8 weeks to figure out an offense. Okay? That's nonsense. If Garoppolo better be in there in a couple of weeks. Because that's inexcusable. It just is. I'm sorry. But people complain all the time in the NBA about teams tanking. This is exactly what's going on in San Francisco. It's a major tank job. And I guess that I guess they have their eye on Barkley. I don't think they necessarily have their eye on one particular guy. I just think that they just want to lose as many games as possible so they have as many great picks as they can get. That's it. Because right now, I think that because they went out and were able to get Garoppolo, they're not going to pick a quarterback in the draft. There's no way they're going to pick a quarterback in the draft. No way. I know there's talk about Garoppolo and will even be there next year. Look, they did not make this trade with the Patriots, with the type of team that they have, to give up a second-round pick to not have Garoppolo on this team next year. He will be their starter. He is their franchise. He is their first-round pick. This team will go out there with the first pick if they get it, or the second pick, because Cleveland's also winless. And this is another reason why we said you really shouldn't tank. Because if you tank, you never know who's going to get that first pick because you don't know how bad the other team's going to be. So, but it looks like either way you could see Barkley being the number 1 pick. But with Cleveland, there's no way the Browns, first of all, that Whole Brown regime is gone. Whoever comes in there has got to pick a quarterback. They know that. So whoever that's going to be, whether it's going to be Rosen, and I think it's either going to be Rosen or Allen. Chances are it's probably Rosen, but Rosen now has been out with a concussion. How is that going to damage his stock? There's no way I see Josh Rosen coming back to UCLA next year. There's no way Allen comes back next year. Then you throw in Mayfield and Rudolph. So you've got 4 quarterbacks that are going to be available, with Rosen looking like the number 1 guy right now, and Allen possibly could sneak into that number 2 spot. Unless Mayfield beats him out. And then it all depends on Darnold. And then so you're going to have 4. It all depends on whether you're going to have 5. But we'll see. Because again, if even if San Francisco ends up with the second pick, Cleveland's got the first. They pick a quarterback. Let's say they go after Rosen, then San Francisco can go after Barkley. All right, but we'll have more than enough time to talk about the draft between here and the draft, and we'll be doing a heck of a lot of that here on the Ourlads Football Network because, hey, it's never too early to talk about the NFL Draft at Ourlads.com. Thursday, Seattle and Arizona. We'll talk about that game first on the Thursday show with Tony Mejia, so keep that in mind. That's our NFL preview show. That's on every Thursday. So we'll be looking forward to that. And I think I'm probably going to – I know we didn't get a chance to spend a lot of time on futures when we talked about the midway point last week with Tony, but I'm going to do that this week because I think after this week, everybody has now played 8 games. So I wanted to make sure about that. So we'll talk about the Super Bowl futures and stuff like that on the show on Thursday and take a look at the updated futures and also, some of the plays and things of that nature that we might be interested in. All right, so Thursday we'll talk about Seattle, Arizona, and then by the way, the primetime games are a disaster this week. Seattle, Arizona, Patriots, Denver, and it may not be Lynch. He may not be ready yet. At least if they have Lynch, there's something to watch there. And Miami, we get to see the Miami Dolphins for the third straight week on national TV if they haven't embarrassed themselves enough the first 2 weeks against Carolina. And Dallas, Atlanta, that is the premier game of the week. So, hey, I hope that game's a pick 'em. I'll tell you right now, I haven't even looked at the rest of the spreads, but if there's 2 games that I would take right now without even needing to see any spreads at all, I would take Dallas against Atlanta and the Jets over Tampa. Can't even believe I just said that with the Jets. To tell you the truth, I can't even believe I just said that about the Cowboys. Okay, so that'll wrap it up here. We'll be here. We'll see you again with our interviews on the meeting room. Also, have a scouting section with Dan Shanka tomorrow. We'll be talking about some players in Miami and Notre Dame. We've got the interviews I talked about. We'll also have our college football and NFL shows later in the week, as well as our fantasy football show on Sunday morning. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at PrimeSN, and we'll see you next time here on the Ourlads Football Radio Network. Thanks for tuning in, and don't forget about the game tonight. Detroit, Green Bay. We haven't picked that game, by the way. We're leaning towards Detroit, but I guess we'll find out if Fred Hundley's for real. I don't think so, but we'll find out tonight. I do have Aaron Jones in my fantasy league. Take its toll if you could. I think a switch and open